There's a truth no one dares to speak, a psychological shadow hidden beneath charm, beauty, and seduction. Many men walk blindly into emotional chaos, not because they are weak, but because they are unaware. In this video, we will expose a disturbing reality that has been buried beneath politeness and fear. You'll discover the deep, unseen patterns in the feminine psyche. Not all women, but those whose shadows dominate them. If you've ever been manipulated, confused, or emotionally drained by a woman and couldn't explain why, you need to hear this. Stay till the end, because what you're about to learn could protect your mind, your identity, and your future. In the depths of the male psyche lies an invisible yet powerful figure, the Anima. She is not a real woman, nor merely a product of fantasy. She is the inner feminine force, ancient, symbolic, and deeply rooted in the collective unconscious. For centuries, men have been driven by her whisper, projecting her onto the women they meet, unaware that what they fall in love with is not the actual person, but a mirrored fragment of their own psyche. And when that projection takes over, beauty becomes blinding, and enchantment turns into entrapment. The Anima in her unrecognized form is one of the most dangerous illusions a man can face. At first, this inner feminine appears divine. She speaks through dreams, fantasies, and sudden attractions. A man feels drawn to a woman with a mysterious pull he cannot explain, not because of her character, but because she seems to complete something within him. She becomes the embodiment of everything he's ever longed for: the muse, the healer, the lover, the savior. This idealized image is not love, it is possession. He begins to lose his discernment. He no longer sees the woman as she is, but as he wishes her to be. His reality dissolves under the weight of his own unconscious. This projection of the Anima can be so overwhelming that it bypasses logic. A man becomes enchanted. He tolerates behavior he would never accept from anyone else. He rationalizes cruelty, defends manipulation, and forgives emotional chaos, all in the name of what feels like love, but is actually surrendered to a psychic force he does not understand. The woman may be completely unaware of this projection, but she senses the power it gives her. She becomes inflated by the attention, consumed by the role she's expected to play, and eventually corrupted by it. In the end, both suffer. The man feels betrayed by the woman who no longer fits the fantasy, and the woman feels crushed under the weight of being more than she ever agreed to be. The danger here is not just emotional, it is spiritual. When a man is unconscious of the Anima within, she governs his choices, desires, and even his fate. She pushes him toward relationships that appear magical but are destined to become destructive. She leads him into obsession, heartbreak, and even madness. The man who cannot separate inner fantasy from outer reality becomes a prisoner of his own mind, desperately chasing a woman who does not exist, because she never existed outside of him. What's more dangerous is how subtle this process is. It doesn't arrive like a storm. It seeps in through admiration, affection, and infatuation. It tells a man that he has found the one, that his loneliness has ended, that his soul has been recognized. And because men are so often starved of emotional connection, the Anima's illusion is accepted without question. But it is in these moments of deepest connection that the greatest illusions form. What begins as romantic union often ends in emotional ruin, not because of the woman, but because the man fell in love with a symbol he never questioned. Without inner awareness, a man's psyche becomes a theater. The Anima writes the script, casts the heroine, and the man plays the devoted lover, unaware that the play is not real. And when the curtain falls, he is left broken, betrayed, and confused. The betrayal was not by the woman, it was by his own unconscious. He worshipped an illusion and mistook it for truth. The woman becomes the scapegoat for his own blindness. He either turns bitter and cynical, blaming all women, or he repeats the cycle, projecting once again, chasing salvation in someone new. To confront this dynamic, a man must journey inward. He must ask, why do I feel this magnetic pull? What does this woman awaken in me that has nothing to do with her? Where does this longing originate? Only by examining these questions can the spell be broken. The inner feminine must be made conscious, named, and known. Only then does she lose her power to deceive. When the Anima is integrated rather than projected, she becomes a guide, not a saboteur. She leads to creativity, depth, and authentic love, not fantasy, obsession, or collapse. Until then, she remains the hidden puppeteer, pulling strings from the shadows. The more unaware a man is of her presence, the more control she has over him. He will continue to chase women who reflect his unconscious desires and then destroy him when they fail to fulfill them. The most dangerous woman a man can meet is not the one outside, but the one who lives within, unrecognized, unchallenged, and disguised as perfection. There exists a certain archetype of woman that does not merely engage with a man emotionally, but instead infiltrates the very fabric of his soul, twisting his sense of identity and control. This woman does not act overtly wicked, nor does she appear dangerous at first glance. In fact, her strength lies in her subtlety. She is charming, elusive, mysterious, and intoxicating. She operates not with direct aggression, but through psychological entanglement. Her allure is not only her beauty or charisma. It is her ability to mirror what the man wants to see, only to later distort that image and make him doubt his own sanity. In her presence, the man is not just in love, he is in conflict. A conflict he cannot understand. This kind of woman thrives on projection. She senses the man's wounds before he does and positions herself as the cure. She listens with intensity, makes him feel deeply understood, and offers an emotional intimacy that seems rare in the modern world. She becomes his confessor, his healer, and his muse. But beneath this surface lies a much darker energy. The intimacy is not built on mutual understanding, but on control. The more the man opens up, the more she gathers, not to nurture, but to use. Every vulnerability becomes a weapon, every confession a future source of guilt. She will love, bomb and withdraw, praise and punish, seduce and reject, all while maintaining the image of innocence. To the outside world, she may appear kind, intellectual, even spiritual. But inside the relationship, she plants confusion. The man begins to question his own memory, his judgments, even his reality. Arguments feel like mazes. Words are twisted. Actions are denied. Apologies are extracted from him even when he's unsure what he did wrong. He becomes emotionally exhausted but still obsessed. He tries harder, becomes more giving, more patient, more understanding, but it's never enough, and she makes sure of it. Her goal isn't connection, it's domination through confusion. This psychological manipulation is a form of power. It is not physical violence, but it is no less destructive. In fact, it's more insidious because it wears the mask of affection. She might cry, express deep regret, or blame her behavior on past trauma, not to heal, but to reset the cycle. Each time, the man is pulled back in, hoping for the woman he first met to reappear. But that woman was never real. She was a projection she created, tailored to the man's desires, designed to ensnare him. Once she has control, the projection fades, and he is left with someone who knows exactly how to keep him emotionally addicted while systematically dismantling his sense of worth. This type of relationship is a psychological battlefield. The man finds himself in constant tension, trying to avoid the next explosion, the next guilt trip, the next silent treatment. He becomes hyper-aware of her moods, his words, his tone. He walks on eggshells not out of fear of violence, but out of fear of emotional collapse. And worst of all, he thinks this is love, because she keeps the illusion alive just enough, with sporadic tenderness, sexual intimacy, or nostalgic charm that he remains hooked. The abuse is never consistent, which makes it more powerful. Predictable pain can be endured. Unpredictable affection keeps the victim trapped. Men trapped in such dynamics often suffer in silence. Society has little sympathy for their experience. By women is minimized, dismissed, or even mocked. But inside, these men are broken. Their confidence is eroded. Their sense of reality is fragmented. They become shadows of who they were. Confused, anxious, isolated. They are made to believe that if they just try harder, everything will return to the honeymoon phase. But that phase was the bait, and now they are inside the trap. Understanding this archetype is crucial, not to demonize women, but to illuminate a pattern of psychological dysfunction. This type of woman is not evil in the cartoonish sense. Often she herself is acting from her own unconscious pain, her own trauma, her own need to control because she was once powerless. But that does not excuse the harm. To engage with such a woman without awareness is to risk psychological ruin. It is to become the frog in slowly boiling water, unaware of the temperature rising until it's too late. The only escape is clarity, a ruthless confrontation with reality. A man must stop romanticizing the potential of the woman and start observing her patterns, not what she says, but what she consistently does. Not how he feels in fleeting highs, but how he feels most of the time. And most importantly, he must examine why he allowed himself to stay. What inner void made him ignore the red flags? What fantasy did he refuse to let go of? This is the painful inner work that breaks the spell. Not blame, but self-confrontation. Not hatred, but awakening. There exists a psychological reality that many men fail to see until it's too late. The existence of the woman who embodies the archetype of dependency and victimhood, but cloaks it in tenderness and helplessness. This woman doesn't dominate through overt manipulation or seduction, but through a constant projection of fragility. She disarms not by confrontation, but by appearing utterly breakable. She makes the man feel as if his presence alone is the only thing standing between her and collapse. It is a different kind of control, softer, quieter, but no less consuming. Her suffering becomes the center of gravity. Her pain is eternal, but just out of reach of resolution, keeping the man in a perpetual loop of rescue, repair, and responsibility. At first, this archetype may be mistaken for deep emotional openness. Her stories are heavy with past traumas. She speaks of being abandoned, used, unloved. She weeps easily, trembles often, and reveals her wounds with such detail that the man feels like he's been chosen as the one who finally gets to save her. He feels noble, essential, masculine. He becomes her caretaker, her protector, her emotional sponge. But he does not see that this relationship is not built on love. It is built on emotional dependency. She needs his validation not as a foundation to grow, but as a life source she cannot survive without. His role is not that of a partner, but of an emotional crutch. This type of woman may not seek power through confrontation, but she gains it by making the man feel guilty for wanting space, selfish for having his own needs, and cruel for not being available at all times. She never says it directly. She simply withdraws when he pulls away. She becomes colder, more silent, more sorrowful. The silence is louder than any argument. It screams of betrayal, even though he's done nothing wrong. The man learns to anticipate her emotional lows, walking carefully, speaking gently, and suppressing his own pain so he doesn't trigger hers. His life shrinks. His freedom disappears. He becomes a caretaker trapped in a cage built of compassion. What makes this archetype so dangerous is that it weaponizes the man's empathy. She doesn't have to raise her voice or lie outright. Her weapon is her sadness. It's the tear that falls after a quiet sentence. It's the trembling voice that says, "You're all I have." It's the late-night call that comes just when he's beginning to rebuild his sense of self. She doesn't scream or rage. She simply dissolves, and with every emotional collapse, she draws him back in, not with force, but with the unbearable pressure of being the one who must save her. The man begins to feel less like a lover and more like a therapist who is never allowed to clock out. He starts censoring himself, not just what he says, but what he feels. He becomes careful with his laughter, suspicious of his joy, and ashamed of his dreams. Why? Because every step he takes away from her emotional gravity feels like betrayal. She doesn't stop him directly. She simply suffers more when he's gone. Her need becomes the chain. He wants to leave, but can't bear the thought of what will happen to her if he does. He stays, not out of love, but out of guilt, pity, and exhaustion. But over time, pity turns to resentment. The man's internal world becomes a war zone. On one side is the guilt he feels for wanting to walk away. On the other is the growing awareness that he is disappearing in the process of staying. He cannot remember who he was before this relationship. His friends fade away, his goals dissolve, and his energy is drained. He begins to realize that he is not loved for who he is, but for what he provides, a constant stream of emotional labor. He is not allowed to be flawed, to be tired, to be weak. He must always be the strong one, the stable one, the healer. But who heals him? This realization often comes too late, when his identity is already tied to the role she has given him. He is the good man, the understanding man, the one who never gives up on her. But this narrative is a trap. It flatters his ego while slowly erasing his spirit. And if he dares to leave, she will activate the final weapon, the collapse. She will cry, scream, beg, threaten to hurt herself, or actually do it, not necessarily out of manipulation, but out of genuine terror. Because she, too, is trapped in her own unresolved pain and her own lack of inner strength, in the myth that only another can make her whole. This archetype must be understood not to blame women, but to awaken men. Not every woman is like this, and not every expression of vulnerability is manipulation. But when a man finds himself always responsible for someone else's emotional stability, when his needs are never safe to express, when love feels like a weight rather than a refuge, he must confront the truth. He must ask whether he is truly loved or simply needed, whether he is seen as a man or merely as medicine. The path out is not cruelty, but clarity. The freedom is not in abandoning compassion, but in reclaiming balance, boundaries, and the courage to let go of those who refuse to carry their own pain. There is a darker archetype that men often fail to perceive until the damage is already done. The seductress of the psyche, the woman who projects intensity, depth, and danger wrapped in the illusion of spiritual connection. She doesn't enter quietly or ask permission. She enters like a storm, unpredictable, magnetic, and overwhelming. She evokes emotions in the man that he didn't know existed. She makes him feel alive, shaken, desired, even divine. Her presence is intoxicating, her words poetic, her gaze piercing through layers of his consciousness. She talks about fate, soul connections, past lives. She says things like, "I've never felt this before," and makes him believe that neither has he. But what he doesn't see is that this intensity is not love. It is chaos masquerading as passion. This archetype preys not on weakness but on strength. She is drawn to men who have built something, whether it's emotional stability, power, discipline, or inner peace. She does not want to be saved. She wants to dismantle. The thrill is not in being loved, but in being able to shake the unshakable. And so, she identifies a man who appears grounded and lights a fire underneath him. Not to warm him, to watch him burn. She invades his psyche with stories of cosmic synchronicity and karmic attraction, not to create harmony, but to destabilize logic. The man, caught in her emotional storm, loses his grip on reason. He begins to confuse intensity with intimacy, volatility with truth, possession with connection. Her unpredictability becomes part of the allure. One moment, she's pouring love into him with wild abandon. The next, she's cold, distant, or accusing him of not feeling deeply enough. The man finds himself constantly trying to re-earn her devotion, constantly questioning what he did wrong, what word he said, what silence he gave. She doesn't punish through absence, but through confusion. One moment, she speaks of forever. The next, she hints at betrayal. Her emotional terrain is a labyrinth, one filled with illusion, projection, and power games. The more he tries to bring clarity, the more elusive she becomes. The more he chases emotional resolution, the deeper he falls into her psychological trap. She often frames her volatility as spiritual sensitivity. She says she feels too much, that the world is too cruel, that her moods are just signs of a deep soul. She believes, or pretends to believe, that her emotional turmoil is a mark of genius, depth, of being misunderstood. The man, especially one with a savior complex or deep empathy, begins to think that maybe she is right, that maybe his stability is boring, that maybe his calm is repression. She makes him question not just his love, but his essence. Her chaos becomes a mirror, and he starts to see his own stability as a flaw. He begins to abandon his boundaries in pursuit of emotional highs that never last. This archetype is often disguised in modern culture as the muse, the woman who inspires, transforms. But in truth, she doesn't awaken the best in the man. She awakens the parts he spent years mastering, his rage, his fear, his insecurity. She makes him reactive again. She knows how to find his emotional blind spots and poke them, not to help him grow, to pull him into the emotional underworld she cannot escape. She does not want peace, she wants intensity. And when peace finally comes, she starts a fire to destroy it. The danger of this archetype lies in the man's belief that he can fix her, that his love can soothe her fire, that if he just proves himself enough, she'll finally settle into tenderness. But she was never looking to be healed. Her power lies in keeping the man chasing something he will never catch. A final moment of harmony that never arrives. She doesn't lie with malice, she lies with confusion. She believes her own delusions, and in doing so draws others into them. The man loses time, clarity, and sometimes even his sense of self. He begins to think that love should hurt, that passion must come with destruction, that emotional chaos is a sign of depth. And when the man finally tries to leave, she doesn't beg. She often lets him go, not because she doesn't care, but because she believes he'll come back. And often, he does. Because she's not easy to forget. She leaves a mark, not on the heart, but on the psyche. He dreams of her. He thinks of what he could have done differently. He revisits her words, her laughter, her tears. He wonders if he was too cold, too safe, too predictable. He questions if he left too soon. She lingers like a ghost, whispering doubts into his future relationships, because her power was never in love. It was in the psychological imprint of emotional addiction she created. This type of woman can only be seen clearly through deep inner reflection and detachment from the intoxication of emotional extremes. The man must stop mistaking emotional chaos for spiritual significance. He must ask himself whether he is truly growing in her presence or merely unraveling. He must separate depth from destruction, passion from manipulation, mystery from toxicity. Only then can he break free. Only then can he reclaim the truth that love, in its purest form, does not require suffering to be profound. There is one final archetype that completes this psychological portrait, the shadow mother. This figure is not merely a woman, but a psychic representation of a deep, unconscious pattern rooted in the earliest parts of a man's development. She represents both the comfort of dependency and the terror of entrapment. In the beginning, she may appear as the ultimate nurturer, supportive, loving, endlessly giving. She says the right things, provides safety, mirrors your needs, and anticipates your desires. But her generosity is not unconditional. It is tied to control. She needs you to need her. Her power grows in direct proportion to your helplessness. And just as a child clings to his mother for survival, a man may cling to this archetype, mistaking comfort for love, obedience for harmony, submission for loyalty. This dynamic becomes especially dangerous when the man begins to evolve. As he grows into independence, strength, into spiritual clarity, the shadow mother reacts, not with pride but with subtle sabotage. She wants the man dependent, emotionally or psychologically. If he begins to rise socially, intellectually, spiritually, she feels threatened. She may not even consciously realize it, but her psyche fears abandonment. And so, the moment he shows signs of pulling away, she will unconsciously begin to pull him back. This does not always happen with direct confrontation. It is often more insidious. She might suddenly become emotionally wounded, invoking guilt in the man. She might question whether he has changed for the worse, whether he has become distant or selfish. Her methods are psychological, not aggressive but invasive. What makes the shadow mother so difficult to identify is that her manipulations are cloaked in tenderness. She is rarely cruel. Instead, she becomes too understanding, too giving, too selfless. She overfunctions in his life, becoming the emotional center around which he orbits. She slowly replaces his capacity for autonomy with the illusion that her presence is indispensable. He may even believe that without her, he cannot function. And when he tries to assert boundaries, she breaks down. Not in anger, but in tears, in anxiety, in stories of being left behind. Her victimhood becomes her power. He becomes the villain for simply trying to stand alone. Over time, the man begins to internalize a belief that his strength causes pain, that to lead to change, to evolve, is somehow cruel. He learns to suppress his ambition, his voice, his vision, all to maintain emotional peace. But this peace is not peace, it is submission. The shadow mother archetype does not want partnership, she wants possession. Her affection is proportional to how much of himself he is willing to give up. And so, the man lives in a state of psychological debt. He is always trying to repay her kindness, trying to deserve her loyalty, trying to protect her fragility. But her fragility is not real. It is a projection designed to maintain power through weakness. In relationships, this archetype creates a cycle of guilt and sacrifice. The man becomes the caretaker, the emotional provider, the silent sufferer. He believes that love means never upsetting her, never leaving her emotional needs unmet, never prioritizing his own growth. And when he does assert himself, even slightly, punishment is subtle, withdrawn affection, emotional coldness, or increased anxiety. She may say things like, "You've changed," or "You're not the man I fell in love with," all in service of pulling him back to a state of emotional dependency. It's not a scream, it's a whisper, not a command, but an expectation. This archetype can even distort the man's understanding of future relationships. He begins to seek women who remind him of the same pattern. Women who coddle him in the beginning, who validate his every thought, who mother him emotionally. But eventually, the same dynamic emerges. He is only loved as long as he remains passive, emotionally available on her terms, psychologically obedient. The moment he asserts his true power, his need for space, growth, or individuation, he is either shamed or abandoned. This cycle repeats until the man identifies the origin, the unconscious bond with the shadow mother. To free himself, the man must confront the guilt that binds him. He must understand that love is not a contract of eternal sacrifice. He must grieve the loss of emotional safety he thought he had, and embrace the unknown strength of standing alone. The path forward lies not in rebellion or rejection, in detachment. He must learn to recognize when care is conditional, when affection is a tool of dependency, when love becomes a prison instead of a refuge. Only then can he reclaim his power not as a weapon, but as a birthright. Only then can he begin to experience relationships built not on need, but on mutual recognition of wholeness. In a world where illusions often masquerade as love, where comfort hides control, and where dependency is dressed as devotion, the path to inner liberation demands more than awareness. It demands transformation. What wounds us is not always what strikes us with force, but what entangles us slowly, silently in the name of care, affection, and belonging. Some relationships are not connections. They are cages lined with velvet. To protect yourself from harm that comes disguised as tenderness, you must become radically honest about your own unconscious patterns. Ask not only who the other is, but why you are drawn to them. Examine the archetypes that pull at your heart, the victim, the savior, the mother, the seductress. And look not outward for villains, but inward for truths you have long ignored. The journey to becoming unbreakable begins the moment you stop seeking to be understood by others and start understanding the unhealed parts of yourself. Goal is not to shut out the world, but to step into it with such deep clarity of self that no force, emotional, psychological, or relational, can manipulate, define, or diminish you. Your sovereignty begins where your unconscious ends. And when the shadow is brought to light, when the unseen becomes seen, no one and nothing can ever hurt you again. Not because the world has changed, but because you have.